We're going all in on Legions Imperialis, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you not only how I paint my Alpha Legion army, but also building the single most detailed and ambitious terrain piece I've ever made.
We've also got a ton of buildings to paint up, so follow us along as we start our next part on this epic board.
It's tabletop time! This plaza has taken all of my attention. I'm completely focused and fixated on it. I've been thinking about it endlessly. It's really, really cool and I'm really excited to build it. Jen's done a great job making this stylized vector, and I was even excited to have just been able to laser cut it. Detailing this is going to take time, and it's time we can only buy by splitting this project into multiple videos. So I'm really excited that we're giving that a crack. We can't usually afford to spend the hours to days of finesse on one particular detail point of the project, but for this one, for this centerpiece, I think it's worth it. I'm using a whole bunch of different plasticard to handcraft stairwells to scale in Epic that will make this plaza fit neatly on the board and feel like part of that world. I'm using L-shaped pieces of plasticard, which you can just buy in packets, to create little balustrades at roughly human waist height. These allow people to lean on them and look out at the town, or maybe just avoid a nasty fall. Making these kinds of concessions to real design and real world things is what makes models feel alive. This is the stuff that a real plaza would have. So by omitting it, without thinking about it, your brain picks up that something's not right. The most important feature that's taken the longest amount of time is these handmade stairs. And to do them, I got plasticard in various strips, doing a tiny little bit of math. I got 1mm by 4mm strips, laid a 1mm by 2mm strip on top, and then used 0.5 mm by 1 mm strips to create the steps in between. When it's glued together, it actually came up a tree. Cutting all of the barriers to interesting angles and fitting around the beaks of the Aquilas took quite a bit of time, but ultimately I think it's going to be worthwhile. There is quite an obvious space in the center where I'd planned to put this statue or memorial to heroes, and I wanted to elevate that just slightly, so I used some plasticard tiles and just created a square for the center. This will also make for a really good indicator of exactly where you're supposed to place that memorial. For the top of the Aquila, there is a detail that I think is really important. The Imperial Aquila has one eye blindfolded and one eye open. This is very important symbology chosen by the Emperor and would obviously be depicted in a plaza to its honor. So for the Imperial Eagle's head with the eye open, I decided to make a square that would basically become a little area of seating, and in the center, a garden bed. Later on, once I've painted this, I'm going to build a tree and place it here. So when seen from the sky, there will be this vibrant pop of green, making the eye of the Aquila full of life. I think this kind of symbology is really important and helps to distinguish the Horus Heresy from 40k, where that kind of optimistic architecture would probably not exist. Another way I've chosen to realize this symbology is with the blindfolded eye of the other eagle. For here, I created a park bench. It is a place of contemplation where people can sit down and think. Not only do these become functional parts of a plaza that make a lot of sense, but they also help to create the narrative of the worlds we love, and I'm really happy with how it's turning out. With the center of the plaza's focus done for the scratch building, it's time for me to move on to those wings. Now, the reasons for these sections in each of the pinions of the wings is to create a border section between the concrete and what will go on to become small parks. I want this center plaza to become a real lived-in place, and when I think of plazas in these cities, often they're filled with greenery, plants, they're a place for people to have lunch after work, have clandestine meetings, take their kids, or any number of things. So I really like the idea of having these nice bits of greenery in the Aquila's wings, and these tiled sections allow for that transition to look really smooth. As with all this plasticard work, it's very fiddly at this scale, lots of checking angles, slicing it, but really after that, it's just a bunch of repetition. As a final touch for the physical elements to make this feel alive, it was time for park benches. And made up, I think, 16 park benches, placing them at various spots around this park where people can have a rest, a chat, feed the pigeons, or whatever else you do in the 31st millennium. I definitely think this helps the plasticard all sit in place and starts to make sense of it all. So for the final step in the construction, I used 2 different texture pastes to fill out all of those planter pots and create some ground for the grassy park areas, and then chopped up some toothpicks to make some trees. But all of that will take a while to dry, so while that dries, we're gonna go see how Jen painted all of the buildings for our board. I'm having so much fun. The plasticard is done on the build, and I'm ready to go on with some of the earth effects. This has taken so long, like a crazy amount of time. We never get to do this, so it's been really fun to do something with finesse yes, I am in love. The park benches, the tiles. I think this is going to be really, really special, and I can't wait to dive into the next stage, which means, well, mud textures, building out some of these little parks, and then I get to paint it and build some trees. It's going to be awesome. Let's do it.
So starting off from where I'd left the buildings off previously, I had a fair bit of work to do. First up, I had to brighten up these buildings just that little bit more, so I went ahead and dry brushed a layer of white just to really bring the contrast up on these buildings. Moving on to the next step, I had to pick out all of these tiny details. I used silver metallics for all of the air vents and a couple of the pipes, and then used black Templar contrast for all of the tiny windows on top. Adding in a few pops of color, I used another contrast paint, this time a Flesh Tearers Red, for this power unit on top of the building. I think this ties in really well with Dave's red buildings, as well as some of the other buildings we have in the city sector. Going back in with the metallics, but this time choosing a gold, I went around and trimmed all of the windows, as well as any of the Aquilas that were on the buildings. I opted for a bronze color, the same as Dave's buildings, when it came to my doors, so that they matched. I also wanted to incorporate a little bit of teal into these buildings, and luckily enough, we included a small turret, so I could paint this up teal and trim it with gold. Once that was all done, I gave everything a heavy wash with Nun Oil. Originally, I thought I was going to keep the roofs of these buildings this creamy color. After a bit of debate, we decided to paint them gray instead. I think this was a really smart idea because it gives it just a little bit of contrast, and overall, I just think it looks way better. This did require a couple of layers just to get a nice even coat. On our city buildings, I opted for a teal color for the roofs instead, just so they looked a little bit more regal. While the grey roofs were looking good, we decided to go in with some stippling just to give it a bit of texture. I went in with a lighter grey and then worked back in that darker grey just so it blended in nicely. I couldn't forget to pick out those tiny details. Using a silver and the bronze color from before, I worked my way around all of the buildings to make sure these were painted in. And for the final step of my paint job, all I needed to do was go around with the burnt umber pigment and get these into all of the nooks and crannies, focusing on the edges and any small details I wanted the dust to set in. This really gave it a nice weathered look and tied it back into the warmer colors I'd been using previously. Overall, I'm really happy with how these buildings look, and I can't wait to see them on the tabletop. But Dave's plaza is still drying, so I think it's time for Dave to show you guys how he paints his Alpha Legion for Epic.
So Alpha Legion paint schemes are something I've been struggling with for like 6 years now. I can never settle on something. I don't know why. I'm always drawn back to the cover art of Legion, and I can never get past the fact that for my entire life, the Alpha Legion paint scheme was different. Originally, it was actually like a navy blue, and it was sometimes highlighted in silver, sometimes gold, sometimes green. And then as time went on, it also got the green scales on it and everything. I feel like Games Workshop also didn't really know what to do with it. And the original Heresy art scheme, as you can see on the cover of Legion, was actually purple with green and silver all over it. It was only when the Horus Heresy Black Books came out that the paint scheme changed. And finally, we saw this bright, cobalty, metallic paint scheme. I'd spent a lot of time avoiding painting my Alpha Legion like that. I generally wasn't confident in metallics and felt that all the contrast paint over metallics, all those armies kind of looked the same, and I always liked my army to look a bit different. So I've been muddling around with different concepts for a while, but I finally found something I think I'm happy with, at least at epic scale. So that's what I'll be painting today. I'm doing the 20th Legion, my alphas, and I'm going to share it with you. So the thing that's always been missing for me in the metallic scheme is it's too shiny. There's too much metal, which means the trim is hard to pick out from the armor. So I decided to start mine with purple, a real homage to that classic Legion color scheme. I paint the whole model in Phoenician purple over a black base coat, and then I dry brush on a mix of cobalt metal and black metal from scale 75. Focusing with scratchy dry brushes on the upper surfaces actually creates a really cool gradient, as the metallic flakes reflect light in increasing amounts towards the highlight areas. It means that the whole model doesn't end up looking like a mass reflective blob of metallic paint, but it still gets that iridescent sheen. The next step is a second dry brush on those extreme areas just with that cobalt metal on its own. To give that slightly more venomous green pop, I then do a line highlight with Emerald Alchemy, focusing on the raised areas, edges, rivets, and sometimes doing a stipply little highlight on raised domes. So to get my handle on this scheme, I did tackle a Predator first before doing the Sakaran you can see me painting today. And with larger models such as the tank, there's lots of panel areas. And a nice tertiary color for the Alpha Legion is gray or black. So to paint these black areas, I highlight up with my favorite brown grays, Skaven Blight Dinge and Storm Vermin Fur, mixing them together and highlighting up towards the upper areas. all of the brass areas and some metallic components just to create more variance in the color scheme. I paint with decayed metal from scale 75. There's also the silver elements, which I can paint with either black metal or lead belcher. Sometimes I forget which is on hand and they wind up pretty similar. On this scale, it can help to use a little Nuln Oil wash, especially with the metallic dry brush. It can help dull down the metallic reflection in those recesses and really help make the highlights pop. For the brass areas, I highlight with Viking Gold before giving them all a gentle wash with some Agrex Earthshade. On this Sakaran, I painted some white gradients with grays for the plasma coils and then used some Warpstone Glow contrast paint to create the plasma effect. I'm not going to play around with OSL here. The turret is rotatable and replaceable, so I don't think there's a way I can accurately do it, and at this scale I don't think it's necessary either. As I get towards the end of my color scheme, lenses are painted in an orange, which makes for a nice contrast with those purple base tones, and I apply some wonderful transfers. Interestingly enough, the Alpha Legion are completely omitted from the transfer sheets in the core box. However, if you pick up a Legion vehicle box, you do get transfers for every Legion. So grabbing a Legion Kratos box, I got the transfers, and this gave me what I needed to put some Hydras and Alpha Legion numerals on all of my models. With these set with Microset and Microsol and blended in with a touch of paint, I could then use some weathering pigment, burnt umber from Vallejo, and focus this all over the tracks and around the base of the model, and then a few patchy bits of dirt up on the top. I also think these tones mixed through with the metallics create some wonderful effects across the miniature. For the infantry, I follow almost the same steps. However, you don't need to do the second dry brush of cobalt metal, as these models are so small. You can just go straight in with the first dry brush and then skip to the Emerald Alchemy as a little line highlight, just dabbing on top of the heads. The shoulders I painted black. The bolters a Phoenician purple with a green stripe on them, just to completely remind you of that Legion cover. This is literally the paint scheme from Legion, and I've preserved it only on the bolters. I think it's a neat little pop of color on some models that need a little bit more attention to their center. Other than this, the process for painting the infantry is pretty much exactly the same as the tanks, except I have to do a tiny squiggly freehand of a Hydra on the arm with some of that Stonewall Grey. These Hydras are a little bit inconsistent, and that's fine. The Alpha Legion are a little bit inconsistent. It's very hard to paint tiny Hydras at this scale. Overall, I am very happy with how they've all come out, and I'm actually really excited to try this paint scheme on my full-scale Horus Heresy soldiers. Although I will say the prospect is terrifying, because if it looks good, I'm going to want to repaint my army. But with a little aside showing you the force I've been building for my Alpha Legion, we can get back to the matter at hand, which is of course this awesome epic board. It's too windy. There's always something satisfying about when you do a kit bash or conversion and then finally put that primer on it, because it unifies all the elements, and I gotta say, I'm really happy with how this has turned out. So it's time to paint all of this terrain, and that means sponging. This is a fantastic way to create texture at epic scale. I just used some high density foam to sponge on a few different grays, but I started with a khaki over black. This establishes a bit of dirt and texture that's been worn into the concrete, and a mix of Stonewall Grey and white to sponge over the top and build up a multifaceted, multi-tonal textured concrete. This emulates the grime, discoloration, bird poo, whatever you want, or even natural gradation in this material. I decided on using grey and then the terracotta red of some of the buildings in this central plaza for the colors of the Aquila square. Hand painting on the terracotta all around the edges. I could then dry brush this with a tan. This left all the dirt areas, which I painted in charred brown and then dry brushed with Vallejo earth. This process took quite a long time. There's a lot of surface area, a lot of small areas, a lot of careful stippling, and making sure I'm not getting paint all over stuff. It's certainly more time than I would usually spend on terrain. And when you think of this, if this was 40k scale, this Aquila would be about the size of an entire gaming board. But at the end of the day, for the centerpiece of this board, I really do hope it's been worth the effort.
Crags and spurs of the Space Marine's body that scored lines into the indigo of his plate.
I'm sorry, the what? The what of his plate? The indigo, I told you. Alpha Legion were purple. They're purple! So the building and the painting is done. I'm excited. This has taken so long. I understand why finesse is like a thing. we don't usually get time for. But it's very cool. It's time to bring it to life though. It's very drab, it's very dry, it's very dark, and life is needed. And when we want to include some life, we've got some great tools to do that. And that is the amazing range of products from All Game Terrain. And in particular, I'm looking for the tiny spongy stuff that I can use as bushes at epic scale. All Game Terrain makes a fantastic range of products, from water effects, flocks, basing materials, and all of it with the goal of being usable straight out of the packet and used on your miniature and tabletop projects. With accessible products like these, available in quantities suitable for wargaming, you'll find whatever you need for your project from All Game Terrain. Check out the links in our description to find out more and help support the channel. So I want to take a moment, you and me, the viewer, to basically say thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and share it. And the reason I'm being emphatic about this point is because YouTube is not supportive of big artistic projects. The whole crunch of it is you need to deliver a ridiculous amount in one video. It needs to be sensational. It needs to be a whole finished project, right? This is not that. This is one highly detailed part of an ongoing board build, and if you want to see more stuff made to this level of finesse, it's only possible if the videos gain traction. Put down in the comments how we can help to make these videos more entertaining for you and what we can do to make that possible, because we at Tabletop Time would love to spend more and more time on awesome projects building stuff in the Warhammer universe if YouTube will let us. And that's kind of on us to make good content. It's also on you guys to watch it. Yeah, make sure to let us know what you thought of this video. If it does well, we can keep doing stuff like this. If not, I don't know, paint an army in 24 hours, do a product review. Don't do it. What's good on Wish? I don't know. We would like to thank our amazing patrons. We are able to make 2 videos a week thanks to all of you. And if you'd like to consider helping out the channel and keep us in a job producing this kind of content, please consider signing up to our Patreon. We have weekly behind the scenes catch-up videos, as well as a monthly mini review and exclusive Discord perks. Check it out, links are in the description. This has been so awesome, and I'm unbelievably proud of my tiny piece of terrain. I'm so shocked with how long putting that amount of finesse, fiddly plastic card cutting, aligning, measuring, all of that took so long, but the results I think speak for themselves. And seeing all of the buildings in the city painted, as well as this perfect centerpiece, this town square, I cannot wait to dive into the next video where we actually build that out onto the board, do the roads, the asphalt.
So if you want to see our next part of the build, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can check out what we do next.
It is only with all of your support that we can make videos like this. So remember to show us if you want to see this kind of build, this level of detail. It needs to happen across multiple videos, and the only way that can happen is if you watch it and share it, and yeah, they do well. So we're fingers crossed. Thanks everyone.
This is epic. Get it? Get the pun? Because it's epic. It's funny.